My first question is, would you like me to speak English or Spanish? Spanish? Bien. My slides are in English. Bueno, pues buenos días a todos y antes de nada me gustaría agradecer a los organizadores la amable invitación a estar hoy aquí con ustedes. Vengo después de 30 horas de vuelo, o sea que... ¿English? Okay, English. So I start after 30 hours of flight, so please, first of all, my apologies if I'm unable to pronounce correctly some words. Okay, I'm going to give you an overview of the situation of DCD, donation after circulatory death in Europe, and I have to go back in time to precisely a European city, the city of Maastricht in the Netherlands, in 1995, when the first international workshop on what it was named at that time non-heart beating donation took place. Out of this meeting, there came a classification of DCDs depending on the circumstances of death, which were relevant from the procedural, ethical point of view and from the point of view of post-transplant outcomes and organ viability. In my presentation, I'm going to refer to the two types which are more common in the European setting. I will be talking about uncontrolled DCD to refer to type 2. This means persons who become donors after their death has occurred following a cardiac arrest, which has been resuscitated, and resuscitation has been deemed unsuccessful by the attending team. And I will be talking about controlled DCD to refer to type 3 donors, who are persons who die following a withdrawal of life-sustaining therapy. Well, since 1995 until today, DCD has expanded in a tremendous manner. For you to have an idea, today, 8% of the donors that are reported to the Global Observatory on Organ Donation and Transplantation are DCDs. But it has expanded in a very peculiar manner because the activity remains restricted to a few countries. You can see here North America, US with more than 1,000 DCD last year, Australia, and you can see how Europe is a hotspot for DCD with several countries in red with more than 3 DCDs per million population. Let's take a look in detail to the European setting. And here you can see how several countries have developed some DCD activity in the last year, in 2012, but we can talk, quantitatively speaking, about 5 important countries in DCD: the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Spain. I draw your attention about a very consolidated program in Latvia and an emerging program largely focused on uncontrolled DCD in Russia. The second peculiarity about the expansion of DCD in Europe is that it has developed in a very heterogeneous manner. First of all, countries have largely focused either on controlled DCD or on uncontrolled DCD. So if you take a look to this table and those countries in pink or in blue you have those countries which in the year 2008 were mainly focusing on controlled DCD, and practically uncontrolled DCD was anecdotal in those countries. However, France and Spain has been a pioneer in developing uncontrolled DCD, have largely focused on uncontrolled and ignored controlled DCD for several years. Now things you will see are changing. But we have been, France and Spain are an isle in the world with regards to uncontrolled DCD. What is the reason? But possibly this much has to do with differences in end-of-life practices, very much influenced by social issues, cultural issues, and even religious issues. For instance, those countries largely focusing on controlled DCD are mainly Protestant countries, and countries largely focusing on uncontrolled DCD are mainly Catholic countries. The heterogeneity of the development of DCD in Europe is also put in a graphic manner in this slide for issues as important as the determination of death in the regulatory framework. The no-touch period, this means the period between the cessation of circulation and the moment in which death can be determined. It can be considered irreversible, and recovery can proceed or preservation can proceed, varies tremendously between countries. In the majority, we are talking about 5 minutes, but you can see how in Italy, the no-touch period is 20 minutes, putting into question the viability or the validity of these organs for further transplantation. Talking about protocols and procedures, you can see that countries in blue, focused on controlled DCD, are largely developing super rapid laparotomy with cannulation of the vessels and rapid recovery of abdominal organs. But countries developing uncontrolled, in pink, have been mainly using normothermic regional perfusion, which is presented here. You can see how the aorta is blocked with 2 balloons to isolate perfusion to abdominal organs. And you can see this ECMO approach with the exchange oxygenation membrane to ensure an appropriate or to emulate physiologic conditions of circulation restricted to the abdominal organs. This is the most usual approach in the uncontrolled DCD setting. So first take-home message is that Europe is a hotspot for DCD, but the activity is still restricted to a few countries, and there is a very heterogeneous regulatory framework and practice of DCD. The second issue that I want to address is whether DCD really helps to increase disease donation rates or not. And this has been a question precisely for controlled DCD. Controlled DCD may very well adapt to changes in end-of-life practices and to the treatment and changes in the treatment of neurocritical patients. You may be aware that the compressive craniectomy is more routinely performed today, and this leads to many patients with devastating brain injury dying not as a consequence of brain death, but after a withdrawal of life-sustaining therapy. But the availability of the program may also modify somehow end-of-life practices for particular patients. So there is a fear that persons who could evolve to brain death should elective ventilation be maintained could be prematurely converted into DCDs. This concern was precisely put forward by the Netherlands already a few years ago. In red, you have the number of DCDs per million population, and in blue, the DBDs per million population. So at the beginning of the century, you can see how, as DCD increases, DBD decreases. In 2007, following an alarm of the authorities to intensive care units, DBD increased again. But it has remained very low, and at present in the Netherlands, 50% of the deceased donors are DBD and 50% are DCD. If you see the green line, which represents the overall disease donation rates, we could see somehow a trend towards an increase, but overall it has remained quite stable over the years. So there may be a replacement of DBD by DCD. And if this happens, it is a problem because DCD is going to consistently yield to less organs recovered and organs transplanted per donor than DBD. Now, this concern about the replacement of DBD by DCD has not been consistent in every country. I was talking right now to the colleague in the US who was saying that it is not a concern in the US at present. Let's take a look to what happened in Great Britain. In Great Britain, in the UK, there was a group conferred by the administration, by the health authorities in 2008 to prepare a plan to develop disease donation activities in the country with a target of increasing disease donation rates by 50% within 5 years. One very important recommendation was that DCD had to be a usual discussion at the end of life, and that the entire system should embrace donation as a usual practice. So many patients were dying after the withdrawal of life-sustaining therapies. Then DCD started to be a priority. An entire regulatory framework has been developed in these years in the UK for making DCD happen. Well, here you have the same slide that we saw before for the Netherlands, for the UK, and you can see how at the beginning of the century, as DCD increases, DBD decreases, but at a certain point, you can see how DCD increases, and overall disease donation increases as well. And somehow they have reached that target of 50% increase of disease donation as planned at the expenses of developing DCD. As for Spain, this is the situation of DCD along the years. I draw your attention on this slide because in Spain we have had a moratorium on controlled DCD that has lasted for 17 years. But we also understood that there were patients dying after the withdrawal of life-sustaining therapy in our reality. So in the last years, we have worked for not only making uncontrolled DCD, but also controlled DCD occur. And you can see how in a very few years, we have gone from one controlled DCD in green in the year 2009 to already 41 in 2013 as for today. So this is really increasing in a very outstanding and rapid manner, more than we expected, and it is really contributed to increase the disease donation activity in our country. So second last message, DCD can substantially contribute to increase overall disease donation rates, although some concerns have been raised precisely in the Netherlands about the overlap between controlled DCD and donation after brain death. My final message is a positive one. What can we achieve with DCDs? For you to have an idea, this is the number of patients that have been transplanted in Europe for a 12-year period thanks to DCD. We are talking about more than 10,600 patients, and you can see how there are already, of course, programs of kidney transplantation, but also with liver, of lung, and even of pancreas transplantation, largely in countries working on controlled DCD. I don't have time to go through the results, but I'm just going to refer to kidney transplantation from DCDs. This is the largest available published series on controlled DCD from the United Kingdom, where you can see how graft survival is absolutely identical with kidneys obtained from DCD and those obtained from DBD, except for recipients of a second transplant. This is a very important issue that the authors could not address very well in their very good article, on the other hand. Important to say that as expected, the incidence of delayed graft function is significantly higher in recipients of DCDs versus DBDs, but this delayed graft function does not significantly impact post-transplant outcomes and survival in recipients of these organs. A similar situation we have in uncontrolled. This is the largest series published from the group in Madrid, where you can see how graft survival is similar for recipients of DCDs, of uncontrolled DCD kidneys, compared to DBDs below 60 years of age, and significantly higher than graft survival of recipients transplanted from DBDs over the age of 60 years. And this has led to the conclusion in Spain that these organs are not suboptimal organs at all. As it happened previously, delayed graft function is frequent, but it does not significantly impact post-transplant outcomes in terms of survival. So last take-home message is that DCD has allowed an important transplantation activity in the European reality with extraordinary results in the setting of kidney transplantation. And although I did not have the time to go through it, with very promising results in liver, lung, and pancreas transplantation. Just to finish, I want to tell you that being aware of the European reality, we have a huge amount of expertise in Europe about DCD, controlled and uncontrolled, but it is restricted to a few countries. The practice is very heterogeneous, so we thought we had to move forward, and that's why 4 competent authorities, including mine, the Spanish National Transplant Organization, with the European Society for Organ Transplantation, is now working in the development of European recommendations for developing and optimizing DCDs. They were presented, the draft recommendations, in this meeting in Paris in February this year, but they are going to be published in Transplant International soon, and we believe they will help us to move forward in DCD, not only within the European boundaries, but in other areas of the world. Thank you for your attention.